The file said diversity hire, like it was a warning. That was the first thing Leonora Ashby saw when she opened her inbox on a Monday morning in October. Not a greeting, not a subject line with her actual name, just a forwarded thread from the department head with 3 words highlighted in yellow: diversity hire confirmed. She set her coffee down. Read it again. Then she closed her laptop, stood up, and looked out the window of her office on the 14th floor of the Beaumont Sinclair Center in downtown Ottawa. The Parliament building sat across the river the way they always did, old stone, gray sky, indifferent to everything. Leonora had spent 23 years in civil engineering. She had rebuilt a crumbling overpass in Gatineau. She had redesigned the drainage infrastructure for 3 municipalities in northern Ontario after the 2019 floods. She had been brought in as a senior consultant on the Trillium Bridge expansion project, the largest federally funded infrastructure project in the National Capital Region in a decade. She had not applied for this position because she needed it. She had applied because they had called her. But the email did not know any of that. And the man who sent it, Director of Project Engineering Gerald Foss, was about to find out that he had made a very specific kind of mistake. Gerald Foss had been at Beaumont Sinclair for 18 years. That fact was not a small thing at a firm like this one. Tenure meant trust. Tenure meant the kind of quiet authority that does not need to announce itself. Foss was 61 years old, built like a man who had once played rugby and never quite forgiven his body for stopping, and he had a way of walking into a room that suggested he had already decided what the room was for. He had interviewed Leonora twice. Both times, he had spoken mostly to the wall behind her head. She had noticed. She had said nothing. She was 53. She had been noticing things and saying nothing about them for a long time. Not because she was passive. Anyone who had worked with her for more than a week could tell you she was the furthest thing from passive. But she had learned, through long and expensive experience, that the moment you speak in anger is the moment you lose the record. And Leonora Ashby had always kept the record. The Trillium project had a problem, not a small one. The load-bearing calculations for the eastern span had been submitted to the city the previous month, and they had been approved. On paper, they were clean. Gerald Foss had reviewed them personally. He had signed off on them with the kind of confident, sweeping signature that men like him reserve for things they have not actually read. Leonora found the error on a Thursday afternoon in early November, 3 weeks into her contract. She was going through the structural stress models, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she always did when she came onto a project midstream. She had a rule: trust no one's math until you've walked it yourself. It was not a popular rule, it was an effective one. The error was in the lateral load distribution on Pier 4. Someone had used a coefficient that was correct for standard highway bridges, but not for the hybrid cable-stayed design the eastern span used. It was a subtle mistake, the kind that passes through 3 layers of review if each reviewer assumes the layer before them was paying attention. If it stayed in, and if the bridge was built to those specifications, the eastern span would be structurally adequate under normal conditions. Under a 100-year flood event combined with peak traffic load, the exact scenario the project was contracted to withstand, there was a meaningful risk of progressive failure. Not a certainty, a risk, but a real one. Leonora sat with this for a while. That is the part people do not understand about these moments, the sitting. You do not find something like this and immediately reach for your phone. You check it again. You check it a 3rd time. You go back to the source documents. You ask yourself whether you are misreading the parameters. You ask yourself whether the error is yours. Then, when you are completely certain it is not, you make a decision about what to do next. She sent a memo to Foss the following morning. Formal, precise, no accusations, no drama. She identified the pier, the coefficient, the discrepancy, and the applicable code section. She attached her calculations. She copied the project file. She asked him to confirm receipt and advise on next steps before the next submission deadline, which was 8 days away. She did not mention the email she had seen. Not yet. Foss did not respond for 2 days. When he did, it was not a response so much as a redirection. He called a team meeting for that Thursday, not to discuss her memo, which he did not reference, but to present the project timeline and address any concerns that may have arisen among newer team members. He said newer the way you might say junior. He said it in front of 12 people. Leonora wrote it down. Date, time, exact wording. She had a small notebook she used for moments like this. The pages were very full. After the meeting, she stopped him in the hallway. Gerald. She used his first name deliberately. Did you receive my memo from Friday? He looked at her the way people look at something they've already decided to dismiss. I saw it. And? And the models were reviewed by 2 senior engineers before submission. I think it's likely you may have missed some context about the design parameters. He was not unkind about it. That was almost the worst thing. He was the kind of man who delivers condescension so smoothly that it takes a moment to recognize it as condescension at all. Design parameters, Leonora said, are in the memo with citations. I'll have someone take another look. He was already moving away. The submission deadline is Tuesday. I'm aware of the deadline. He turned back briefly, and something in his face shifted, not quite irritation, but adjacent to it. I've been managing submission deadlines at this firm since before you joined us. I think we'll be all right. She watched him walk away and thought, there it is. That right there. There is a particular species of professional disrespect that has nothing to do with shouting. It lives in the word us, used to remind you that you are new here. It lives in the assurance that things will be all right, offered without engaging a single one of your technical concerns. It lives in the assumption, so deep it barely registers as an assumption, that your math is probably wrong and his instinct is probably right. Leonora had been meeting this species of disrespect for 30 years. She knew exactly what it looked like, and she knew exactly what to do with it. She went back to her office and opened her laptop. She sent a second memo. This one went to Foss, and also to the project director above him, a woman named Sandrine Couet, who ran the Federal Contracts Division and who Leonora had worked with briefly, years ago, on a storm drainage redesign in the Rideau Valley. She added the firm's chief safety officer. She attached everything, the original calculations, the error analysis, the applicable Canadian highway bridge design code sections, and her corrected model. She noted, in the final paragraph, that she was documenting this formally given the proximity of the submission deadline and the nature of the structural concern. She was not asking permission anymore. The call came at 7:15 the next morning. It was not Foss, it was Sandrine. Dr. Ashby. Sandrine's voice was the same as Leonora remembered, quiet and very direct, the kind of voice that does not bother with preamble. I've been through your memo from last night. Walk me through Pier 4. Leonora walked her through it. Sandrine asked 4 questions. They were the right 4 questions. When they were done, there was a pause on the line. Then Sandrine said, "Why didn't this come to me sooner? I went to Gerald on Friday. I followed up Thursday in person. When I didn't receive a substantive response, I escalated." Another pause. "All right. I'm going to need to pull in the project engineers this morning. Can you be available at 10? "Yes." "Good." And then, before she hung up, "For what it's worth, the way you wrote this up was exactly right." The 10 o'clock meeting was not comfortable for everyone. Foss arrived looking like a man who had spent the previous 2 hours reading emails he wished he had read on Friday. The project engineers, 2 of them, both of whom had reviewed the original submission, sat across the table with the expressions of people doing rapid internal math about what they had and hadn't signed off on. Leonora sat at the end of the table with her notebook and her corrected calculations and said very little. She had learned long ago that the quietest person in a room full of people who are suddenly very worried tends to be the most powerful one. Sandrine ran the meeting. She was efficient and without ceremony. She asked the engineers to walk through the original model. She asked them to review Leonora's corrected coefficient against the code. She gave them 20 minutes to tell her if Leonora was wrong. They could not tell her that, because she wasn't. The submission was put on hold. A formal review was ordered. The corrected model was submitted to the city 2 weeks later with a cover letter noting that a parameter error had been identified and corrected during internal quality review. It did not mention Leonora's name. She had not expected it to. What happened over the next 3 months was quieter than a confrontation and more consequential. Foss's review of the original submission was flagged internally as a sign-off without adequate technical verification. It was not the first such flag on his record, though it was the most serious. By February, his role had been restructured. He remained at the firm, but his oversight of federal contracts was transferred to another senior director. Leonora was asked to extend her contract. Sandrine called her personally to make the ask. "I want to be direct with you," Sandrine said. "The way the initial concern was handled or not handled, that's not how this firm should work. I want you to know that that's been addressed internally." "I appreciate that," Leonora said. "I also want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer it." "Go ahead." Pause. "The email, the forwarded thread, did you see it before any of this started?" Leonora was quiet for a moment. Outside, Ottawa was doing that February thing where the cold is so specific it has a sound. "Yes," she said. "I thought so." Sandrine let that sit. "I'm sorry. Not on behalf of the firm, I mean it personally." Leonora thought about the 14 floors she had looked down from on that Monday morning in October. The Parliament buildings, the gray sky, the indifference of old stone. "People say things like that in emails," she said, "because they think the email is private. They forget that the work isn't." She extended her contract. She stayed through the spring. The Trillium Bridge eastern span was built to her corrected specifications. When it opened the following autumn, the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure attended the ribbon cutting and spoke about the importance of rigorous engineering standards. Leonora was not on the stage. She was in the third row, in a dark coat, watching the ribbon fall with the same expression she had worn in Gerald Foss's hallway. Calm, attentive, entirely unmoved by ceremony. Her colleague Petra, sitting beside her, leaned over and whispered, "You should be up there." "I know," Leonora said. She said it without bitterness. That was the thing about people who had been underestimated for 30 years and had built something real anyway. They did not need the stage. They needed the bridge to stand. And it was standing. That was enough. That had always been enough. If you have ever sat across from someone who looked through you instead of at you and made a decision about your value before you opened your mouth, you already know this story. You know the particular weight of being seen as a category instead of a person. You know how long it takes to decide whether to say something or to let the work speak. You know that sometimes justice is not a confrontation. Sometimes it is a memo. A second memo. A phone call at 7:15 in the morning from someone who finally read it. And sometimes the bridge just stands there, long after everyone else has gone home, holding up everything that was built on the assumption that you could not be trusted to get the math right. It stands, and so do you. I keep thinking about the notebook. Not the bridge. Not the meeting where Gerald Foss sat across a table and could not find a single error in Leonora's math. The notebook. The small one she carried, with the dates and the exact wording and the quiet, patient accumulation of everything that had been said and then immediately denied. That notebook is the part of this story I can't stop returning to. Because what Leonora Ashby understood, what took me a long time to understand, and what I think most of us learn only after we've already paid for not knowing it, is that integrity is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's what you do on a Friday afternoon when no one asked you to check the calculations again. It's what you do when the person who should have listened to you didn't, and you go back to your desk and write the second memo anyway, and you copy the right people, and you keep the record. That's not drama. That's character. And character, over time, leaves a record that speaks louder than any confrontation. There's a kind of courage I used to misunderstand. I thought courage was about speaking up in the room, in the moment, loudly enough that everyone heard. But watching what Leonora did, or rather, what she didn't do, I think I had it backwards. The harder thing, the thing that actually required more of her, was staying precise when she had every right to be furious. Finding the error, documenting it correctly, escalating through the right channels, not letting her anger at the email, diversity higher, confirmed, highlighted in yellow, bleed into her technical work. That separation between what she felt and what she wrote, between what was done to her and how she responded, that's where the real strength was. It mattered, not just morally, practically, because Sandrine Couet read the second memo, because the math held, because the bridge was built to Leonora's corrected specifications and it is still standing. None of that happens if she lets the hurt lead. None of it happens if she decides the injustice is too large to work around and stops working. I've been in rooms where I was the only one who looked like me. I've had my name forgotten and my work absorbed into someone else's presentation. I know what it feels like to have your competence treated as a hypothesis rather than a fact. And I think what Leonora's story offers, not as a prescription, but as a kind of evidence, is that the work itself can be the argument, not the only argument, not always the sufficient one, but a real one. One that is very hard to dismiss once the bridge is standing and the calculations are on file and the submission deadline has passed and the structure did not fail. What broke Gerald Foss was not Leonora's anger. It was her accuracy, her persistence, her refusal to let the insult be an excuse to be anything less than exactly right. Those three things together, doing right by the work even when the work was not doing right by you, staying sharp when someone had already decided you weren't, and showing up every single day until the record was undeniable. That's what I take from this.
Bridge stands.
And so does she. That's not luck. That's the long result of choices made in quiet rooms when no one was watching.